and it's not how you make the country safe.
Do you feel like law enforcement in some of these sanctuary cities, they want to work in tandem with ICE? Or do you feel like those law enforcement officers they also feel like the laws that are in place for sanctuary cities are correct?
No, I think the cops on the line know what it's like to have. You have two offenders. One was born here and has lived here their whole life. They're going to continue to be offender because most offenders are recidivists. People that go to jail usually commit other crimes after they get out. So you have one offender who was born and raised in a place like New York City. The cops can only do so much. They can arrest them when they commit a crime against the citizenry. And then you have someone else exactly the same crime, exactly the same circumstance, exactly the same age, but that person is born somewhere else and they're here in the country illegally. That cop can arrest that person, hold them to account to the state or city crimes that they committed, and then after they serve their sentence in New York, they could be sent to where they belong. Cops know that there's a benefit in those scenarios where you can take, if that's 100% of the crime you're looking at, you can remove 50% of it after sentencing. And so cops know. They know that this is a benefit, another tool that they would have in their tool bag. And the idea that it's somehow unsafe to cooperate with ICE, that's a myth. And I don't think there's a lot of proof for it.
There is some concern by law advocates and immigration advocates who would say, you're not allowing due process for some of these immigrants, and we would like to see due process for anybody who's here. What would be your response, the administration's response to that?
The process is due process. This individual, the famous guy from El Salvador, who was an MS-13 gang member, had criminal activity in his background here in the U.S., was deported in a due process. The process that exists. Now, the folks on the left, the ACLU, et cetera, these people want to add additional due process on top of what the law allows for now. That individual had an immigration hearing. He appealed the decision of deportation in that hearing and was ordered again. So when they say that this could happen to anyone, they're completely lying to the American people. When they say that he didn't get due process, that's also misrepresenting what actually happened.
You know, as we talk about what the president has done in the first 100 days, a lot of it has been through executive order. He did sign the Laken-Riley Act. But at the end of the day, so much has been executive order. When you look at the numbers of Americans who support his immigration policies, it is in the vast majority of Americans support what he is doing right now. What is the administration doing to ensure that Congress will codify some of these bills into law, some of these EOs into law, so that you can continue to do what you're doing on the immigration front?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we have to solidify the policy choices that are based in policy. And then some of the things like the Migrant Protection Protocols, like the Alien Enemies Act, right, which are laws that are on the books, right? The president found tools that we hadn't been using to help address this problem. And so that's being challenged in the courts. So Congress could limit the scope and authority of some of these district courts, not shut down entire avenues or take an entire tool out of the hands of the front line. So Congress could act there. The most important thing they're going to do is they're going to back up the president's ability to continue to do what we're doing.
Ron, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And has been ordered back to the U.S. He was a man from Venezuela who was seeking asylum, but this time a Trump-appointed federal judge has ordered him back. Why? Because that judge says the deportation violated a court settlement that suspect was part of back in 2019 that protected minors. But the White House argues his alleged gang affiliation disqualifies him from that asylum protection.
Well, the tariff talks continue. The White House saying they're actively negotiating deals with dozens of countries. But the biggest question mark, China. They're currently dealing with an export tariff of 145%. President Trump says talks are underway. However, China says there are no active negotiations happening. A spokesman for China's foreign ministry said, quote, China and the U.S. are not having any consultation or negotiation on tariffs, still less reaching a deal, end quote. The White House has repeatedly said a deal like this is going to take time, but that isn't doing much to calm the concerns of the majority of Americans. New numbers from the Pew Research Center show that Trump's overall approval rating has fallen to 40%. That's down 7% since taking office. When asked about the administration's tariff increases, only 40% of people approve. Tariff disapproval is at 59%. And with that, the lawsuits are picking up steam.
That's the
Last week, it was California. Now, 12 other states have followed their lead, suing the Trump administration, claiming that only Congress has the power to legislate tariffs. All of the states have Democratic attorney generals, while 2 states, Nevada and Vermont, have Republican governors. When it comes to making deals, the White House hinted that the first trade deal could be with South Korea. Today, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said South Korea, quote, came with their A game, and indicated that talks are progressing faster than expected. Much more news coming up. Stay with us. Russia and Ukraine in the next few weeks. But in the meantime, thousands of people continue to die. Overnight, Russia carried out its deadliest attack in months on Kyiv. At least 12 people were killed and 90 wounded. The U.S. has been working to broker a peace deal, but talks have recently stalled.
It's horrible. It's a killing field. 5,000 soldiers a week on average. And we want to stop that. We both want to stop that for a lot of reasons, but I would say that is my number one reason.
Why do you think that Russia, that will get Russia to accept the deal, that also Ukraine and Europe is willing to?
I think so, yeah. I do. I believe they will accept, and I think we're going to get this over with. I hope so, soon.
Now, the president has been calling out both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky for not getting this deal done. Following Russia's deadly missile attack, President Trump called Putin out on social media, saying he's not happy with the strikes, adding simply, Vladimir, stop. But Trump also has been calling out Zelensky, saying that he's preventing the deal from being finalized.
I think we have a deal with Russia. We have to get a deal with Zelensky, and I hope that Zelensky, I thought it might be easier to deal with Zelensky. So far, it's been harder, but that's okay.
So what is this deal being presented by the U.S.? Well, here's part of the framework of this ceasefire deal. It involves ending fighting at the front lines, freezing the territorial lines at essentially where they are now, giving Russia all the territory that it has taken during the war. The U.S. lifting sanctions against Russia. Ukraine being forever barred from joining NATO, but only getting vague security guarantees in return. That minerals deal between the U.S. and Ukraine, that being signed. And Russia retaining control of Crimea, with the U.S. recognizing Russia's right to control it. So here's why that matters. This is Ukraine. But ever since Russia took it over and invaded it in 2022, they've seized a lot of land. And here's where the current front lines are. And down here, this is Crimea, long recognized as Ukrainian territory. Now, back in 2014, Russian troops seized control of it and have been in control of it ever since. And this is one of the key aspects in these negotiations. Let's talk further about these peace talks with Peter Dorn. He's an adjunct senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Peter, welcome. So let's just cut right to the chase. Do you think that we're going to get a deal here in the next couple of weeks?
Well, I think Donald Trump's peace plan is clearly on its back foot right now. The White House has had several setbacks this week, so much so that even Secretary Rubio pulled out at the very last hour from a high-stakes meeting in London. Lonnie, Trump is not happy with either side, but especially with Vladimir Putin, as you pointed out, and he's got a right not to be happy. In the last 24 hours, while he was bashing Ukrainian President Zelensky, Vladimir Putin was the one who unleashed the largest bombardment of Ukrainian civilians since last summer. So if Vladimir Putin wants peace, he has a very violent way of expressing himself.
Well, you know, Peter, it's interesting because this deal actually seems to heavily favor Russia, right? Even though they were the ones that started this war. And clearly concessions have to be made in negotiations. But when asked what concessions Russia is making, here's what Trump said. Listen here.
What concessions has Russia offered up thus far to get to the point where you're closer to peace?
Stopping the war. Stopping taking the whole country. Pretty big concession.
So not taking the whole country. Peter, is that enough? I mean, have we lost sight here that it was Russia that invaded Ukraine?
Well, Lonnie, a lot of times President Trump talks off the cuff, and I think this is one of those examples where he may want to reflect on what he said. We see this time and time again with Russia. They create a problem that only they can solve, and then they negotiate for concessions to stop continuing the problem that they started in the first place. Trump is indicating that Russia's concession is not destroying Ukraine as a country. Well, obviously, the Ukrainians would have words about that. And I think that shows us just how far apart we are. Important note on Crimea, as your excellent analysis indicated, it's against U.S. law, signed by Trump in 2017, for the United States to ever recognize the illegal annexation of Crimea. So it's a little strange for the White House to be pushing Ukraine to do something that the United States, thanks to President Trump's own signature, is barred from doing.
Yeah, I did want to go to that point, Peter. You know, under this deal, Trump wants to recognize Russia's claim over any territory that they have forcibly taken, including Crimea. But as you said, just 3 years ago, when now Secretary of State Marco Rubio was senator, he co-sponsored this amendment to prohibit the U.S. from ever recognizing any Russian claim over the Ukraine territory that had been taken by force, saying, quote, "The United States cannot recognize Putin's claims, or we risk establishing a dangerous precedent for other authoritarian regimes like the Chinese Communist Party to imitate," which is in line, Peter, with that larger global policy that borders cannot be rewritten by force, right? So do you think that there are bigger implications to be drawn here from what Trump is asking for?
Lonnie, that's absolutely correct. Let's recall President Trump and Vice President Vance campaigned on a promise that they were going to pull America out of endless wars and prevent them from happening. What's a great way to spread endless wars around the world? Well, it's for the United States to say, if you invade someone else's country and seize it by force, the United States will let you keep your ill-gotten goods and benefit from them, and we'll recognize those territorial gains. Obviously, that's not a prescription for success. And the person who knows this is Vladimir Putin. It is Putin who has been inserting these poison pills into the negotiation process, knowing full well that his counterpart Zelensky could never accept any of these, knowing full well that the United States shouldn't accept them. So obviously Putin is playing for time, he's playing for attention, and he dearly wants the sanctions to be lifted on his country. President Trump should make sure that never happens until there is a lasting, enduring, and enforceable peace in Ukraine.
Peter, we've got about 30 seconds left. I did want to get back to that question about Ukraine. You know, I mean, do you really see this even as a deal for them, or is this more as a surrender? Because after these 3 years of fighting, this deal really seems to put them in a vulnerable position to be invaded again by Russia in the future.
Well, I think President Zelensky deserves a lot of credit here. He has accepted without conditions a 30-day ceasefire. Vladimir Putin hasn't. Everything that President Trump has asked him to do, he has said, yes, we absolutely will, because we want peace through strength, and we want the world to know that Russia is the aggressor, and we need to be strong in order to maintain peace. And so kudos to the Ukrainian side. Now it falls on Trump to decide what to do with Vladimir Putin.
Well, we'll all have to watch and see what happens next. Peter Dorn, appreciate your perspective here. Thanks for joining us.